Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Hold on to the edge of your seats because you are in for quite the ride. It's time for the Granada Forum Radio Show. Right now, live on air with your host, Granada, Wendy.
Hey, welcome to the Granada Forum radio program, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is, I do believe, the 24th of August. And we have an incredible guest tonight, as you know, Deborah Tavares. And she's also got a special guest, Mr. Paul. So it's going to be a real barn burner, to say the least. My co-host, Mr. Nick Pearson.
Hey, hey.
And my wonderful producer, Mr. Richard Kane.
Hello.
Thank you. We can't live without you either, Rich, because you're the one that keeps everything together. Thank you. So this is Revolution Radio. We are the #1 commercial-free, listener-supported internet talk radio station in the world. And we are at freedomslips.com. That's freedomslips.com, or now revolution.radio. That's revolution.radio. Did I get that right, Nick? I hope I did.
Yeah, you got it right.
Good. Also, too, next week, as you know, we'll be at the 46th Annual Cancer Control Convention for all the alternative therapies at the Glendale Hilton. We're looking forward to that one. That's Labor Day weekend. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, we'll be there the 31st, so Friday live next week, and so we're very happy to be there at the Cancer Control Society. Let me give you some, go to www.cancercontrolsociety.com. That's www.cancercontrolsociety.com, or check out the number at 323-663-7801. That's 663-7801. Again, 323-663-7801. And that's www.cancercontrolsociety.com. I also want to say hello to Red, because we'll be there together next week, too. It'll be a lot of fun. Red and all the gang. That's what we're doing next week, so we're going to definitely give them the big plug. Lots of alternative therapies. Laetrile, oxygen, chelation, electromagnetic therapies, and also some of the best doctors that are doing stuff in you can't imagine in therapies, and it doesn't include, thank God, chemo or radiation. So I hate to tell you, it's one of the best. So that's next weekend, and that's the Glendale Hilton Hotel. One more time, www.cancercontrolsociety.com. And the phone number is 323 area code 663-7801. Nick, you have an announcement you'd like to make.
Yeah, actually, it's this a little off topic for what Deborah and Paul are going to be talking about tonight, but it's definitely worth listening to. You can also find it on our Facebook page. It does very, very much connect the dots of the deep state and what's been going on in Washington, D.C., and I just thought it was worth a read right now, simply because if we don't do it now, we might not get to it later on. So here are the players in the game. Okay, and this is what it looks like when all the pieces are sewn together. It smells like conspiracy and treason, and everybody should read it slowly, patiently, because it's important. Okay, from 2001 to 2005, there was an ongoing investigation in the Clinton Foundation. A grand jury was impaneled. Governments from around the world had donated to the charity, but from 2001 to 2003, none of those donations to the Clinton Foundation were declared. How do you think that an honest investigator would be able to figure this out? Well, guess who took over the investigation in 2002? But you can't guess. Well, it was James Comey. Interesting, huh? So guess who was transferred into the Internal Revenue Service to run the tax exemption branch of the IRS? Nobody you've ever heard of. Somebody just named Lois Lerner. Interesting, isn't it?
Very.
Okay, so that's that bunch of strange coincidences. But guess who ran the tax division inside the Department of Justice from 2001 to 2005? None other than Assistant Attorney General of the United States, Rod Rosenstein. Okay, it gets better. It gets better. So, guess who was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation during this time frame? Just a coincidence, you know.
Mr. Mueller.
Robert Mueller. Okay, so guess what all these have in common? They were all briefed and were frontline investigators into the Clinton Foundation. Coincidence, you think? Okay, so let's chalk the last one up to mere chance. Let's fast forward to 2009. James Comey leaves the Justice Department to go cash in at Lockheed Martin. Hillary Clinton is running the State Department on her own personal email server, by the way. The Uranium One issue comes to the attention of the Hillary. So like all good public servants do, who's looking out for America's best interests, she decides to support the decision and approve the sale of 20% of U.S. uranium to none other than the Russians. Okay, now you'd think this would be a fairly straight up deal, except it wasn't, because people got, we the people got absolutely nothing out of it. But prior to the sales approval, none other than Bill Clinton goes to Moscow, gets paid $500,000 for a 1-hour speech, and then meets with Vladimir Putin at his own home. No big deal, right? Well, not so fast, because the FBI had a mole inside the money laundering and bribery scheme. Guess who was FBI director during this time? Yeah, Robert Mueller. He even delivered a uranium sample to Moscow in 2009. So guess who was handling that case within the Justice Department out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland? Rod Rosenstein. So guess what happened to the informant? The DOJ placed a gag order on him and threatened to lock him up if he spoke out about it. It gets better. So how does 20% of the most strategic asset of the United States of America end up in Russian hands when the FBI has an informant, a mole providing inside information to the FBI and criminal enterprise? Well, guess what happened soon after the sale was approved? $145 million in donations, quote marks, made their way into the Clinton Foundation from entities directly connected to the Uranium One deal. And guess who was still at the Internal Revenue Service working in the charitable division? Lois Lerner. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I swear to God.
Unbelievable, Nick. Good stuff. Absolutely incredible stuff.
Right. So let's fast forward to 2015. Due to a series of events in Benghazi, after the 9 investigations, the House, the Senate, the State Department, Trey Gowdy, who was running the 10th investigation of the chairman of the as chairman of the Select Committee on Benghazi, discovers that Hillary ran the State Department on unclassified, unauthorized, outlaw personal email server. He also discovered that none of those emails had ever been turned over when she departed her public service as Secretary of State was required by law. He also discovered that there was top secret information contained within her personally archived email, sparing you the State Department's cover-up, the nostrums they floated, the delay tactics that were employed, and the outright lies that were spewed forth from the necks of the Kerry State Department. We'll leave it with this. Everything humanly possible was done to cover for Hillary Clinton. Now, guess who became FBI director in 2013? Guess who secured 17 no-bid contracts for Lockheed Martin with the State Department and was rewarded with $6 million thank you present when he departed? James Comey. I mean, seriously. Now,
what a bunch of criminals.
Yeah, amazing how all those no-bid contents just went right through at State, huh? Now, he's the FBI director in charge of the Clinton email investigation. And, of course, as FBI investigates the Lois Lerner matter at the Internal Revenue Service and exonerates her. Couldn't find any crimes. Guess what happens next? In April 2016, James Comey drafts an exoneration letter of Hillary Rodham Clinton. By the way, before they even listed the crimes that they were trying to investigate her for, at the DOJ, handing out immunity deals like candy. They didn't even convene a grand jury. Yeah, so like a lightning bolt of statistical impossibility and a miracle from God himself, and the true gangsta homie that he is, James steps out into the cameras of an awaiting press conference in 2016 and exonerates Hillary from any wrongdoing. Okay, and you're seeing a pattern develop. And it goes on. Rosenstein becomes the Assistant Attorney General. Comey gets fired based upon a letter from Rosenstein. Comey leaks government information to the press. Mueller is assigned to the Russian investigation sham by Rosenstein to provide cover for decades of malfeasance within the FBI, DOJ, and it goes on. FISA abuse, political espionage, pick a crime, anyone, this group and few others did it. All the same players, all compromised and conflicted, all working fervently not to go to jail themselves, and all connected one way or another to the Clintons. They're like battery acid. They destroy everything they touch. How many lives have these two destroyed? As of right now, the Clinton Foundation, in its 20 years of operation, being the largest international charity fraud in the history of mankind, has never been audited by the IRS. And let's not forget that Comey's brother works for DLA Piper, the law firm that does the Clinton Foundation's taxes. Oops. Now let's see that the person that is the common denominator to all the crimes above and still doing her escape legal maneuvers at the top of the three-letter USA agencies, that would be Hillary Rodham Clinton. So let's get on to this. Who is Lisa Barsoomian? Let's figure a little bit about her. She is a U.S. Attorney General that graduated from Georgetown Law as a protege of James Comey and Robert Mueller. With her boss, R. Craig Lawrence, represented Bill Clinton in 1998. She also represented Robert Mueller 3 times, James Comey 5 times, Barack Obama 45 times, Catherine Celebes 56 times, Bill Clinton 40 times, and Hillary Clinton 17 times. Between 1998 and 2017, she represented the FBI at least 5 times. And everybody, you may say, who cares? But apparently someone does, because someone out there cares so much that they've purged all of her court documents for her Clinton representation in the Hamburg versus Clinton in 1998 and its appeal in 1999 from the D.C. District and Appeals Court dockets. So they got rid of all of that information. This indicates that the individual is a protected CIA operative. Also, Lisa Barsoomian has specialized in opposing Freedom of Information Act requests on behalf of the intelligence community. And although she has been involved in hundreds of cases representing the D.C. office of the U.S. Attorney, her email address is lisabarsoomian@nih.gov. NIH stands for the National Institutes of Health. Okay, this is a tactic routinely used by the CIA to protect an operative by using another government organization to shield their activities. So it's a cover. Big deal, right? I mean, what does one more attorney with ties to the U.S. intelligence community really matter? Well, it deals with Trump and his recent tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum imports, the border wall, DACA, and everything coming out of California, the uniparty, unrelenting opposition to Donald Trump, the Clapper leaks, the Comey leaks, Attorney Jeff Sessions' recusal, and subsequent 14 months nap with occasional forays into the marijuana legalization mix. But last but not least, Mueller's never-ending investigation into collusion between Trump and the Russians. So why does Barsoomian, CIA operative, merit any attention? Because she is Assistant Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's wife. That's why. I mean, if this doesn't raise a hair on the back of your necks, seeing all of this playing out in Washington, D.C., I don't know what's going to do it.
I 150% agree on this, Nick. I totally agree with you.
That is some of the most unbelievable collusion, corruption that you have probably ever seen that had ever come out of the Obama administration right there, where they put all these people into all those positions, and all they did was rob everybody, rob the people of the United States and cover for it.
And committed treason and terror as well.
And of course, they will never prosecute it.
Yeah, this is a problem.
And the same problem is with Stephen E. Biegun, B-I-E-G-U-N. He was involved with the initial operation of the Afghan war, which is still going on. He was under Condoleezza Rice. He spoke Russian fluently, and so did Condoleezza Rice. And all of those Moscow business negotiations, and he's now going to be our representative to North Korea to denuclearize.
Okay. All right. We're going to have to move on.
I think
we're going to
we
have to
all
move on to that at another time there, John.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no promise, John.
So anyway, we're going to move on with our guest,
Introduce our guest,
Deborah
Nick.
Tavares and Pal Pauer. So Deborah, it's all yours. Take it away.
Well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is Deborah Tavares. I run several websites. The one we're going to be speaking about this evening is primarywater.org, although I do host and run stopthecrime.net. Today is August the 24th, 2018, and I'm saying the date for this show because there are some regulations that have gone into place just a few weeks ago that are important for everyone to know about. And we're going to be talking about primary water this evening with the primary water king that runs the website primarywaterinstitute.org. And primary water is why we are not running out of water. And I can only say that this is really an emergency request and information that's got to get out far and wide, because we are being poisoned not only politically, but by the air, the water, the sea, and now massive restrictions for reduced water consumption are now occurring. And they're occurring in other countries and in the United States. And most recently, many of you heard about the reduced water allowance per person here in California per day, a reduced water allowance. So we're going to be covering the fact that we don't have a water shortage and there's water available. And to that end, you're going to wonder why. Santa Monica in Southern California recently created a ban on private well drilling. And they're instituting, as all the cities are, in fact, all the cities across the United States are looking to institute new groundwater plans. So I would urge everybody, look at your water agency in your city. Your water agencies are and have been working on reducing your ability to access water. And I'm going to just read to you what the water agency says here in Sonoma County in Northern California, where I am, so that you can then access your water agency and type in groundwater management plan. This is coming from the United Nations and the World Bank to massively restrict water resources and charge increased costs for accessing what little they will allow you to access. So here is out of my search in Sonoma County in the water agency. It says, working today for water tomorrow. The mission of the Sonoma County Water Agency is to effectively manage the water resources in our care for the benefit of people and the environment through resource and environmental stewardship, technical innovation, and responsible fiscal management. The water agency is a regional leader in water resources management, and the water agency strives to look forward beyond today's issues to anticipate ways to advance its mission. Additionally, the water agency continues to adapt its mission in response to changing opportunities, keeping the water agency at the forefront of development in a new water industry. That's what this is all about. It is a new water industry, and it is confining all of our access to water, even access to water on the farms. So again, Santa Monica in Southern California just created a ban on water wells pending the new groundwater adaptation that they will be bringing in. Now, who is going to also be adopting this groundwater adaptation plan? Los Angeles County, Culver City, the City of Beverly Hills, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. This is going to go through California like lightning. And it is going to come to you too. Even if you believe that you are a water-rich state, or wherever you are, if you believe you're water-rich, you're going to be confined by limited water resources. And we're going to talk about the ways in which the water is being poisoned now. And I think certainly we can just toss out that we have toxic algae bloom literally around many areas off of the Florida beaches right now, highly toxic. And it's known as the red tide. And it's killing off wildlife and sickening people around Florida's southeast coast or southwest coast. And recently, Manatee County in Florida declared a local state of emergency as red tide cleanup efforts are continuing. And what has been happening and why this is water related, it's all part of the poisoning of the water supply and why it's important for all of you to know about primary water. So what's happening in this toxic algae bloom cleanup is volunteers are cleaning up the dead fish that are littering the beaches in Florida and the waterways. And human illnesses can be debilitating or even fatal, according to NOAA. And the toxins produced by red tide kill fish and make shellfish dangerous to eat. The red tide also makes surrounding air difficult to breathe and causes respiratory issues in people. So I want you to remember this assault as well. It's all part of the climate action plans that I've talked about. And in your plan, it talks about the type of assault you will be contending with in your area. Again, I urge all of you, type in the name of your city, followed by climate action plan or resilient plans to understand the level of the reduction of resources and the implementation of weather warfare on your areas. But I want to talk about, again, what's happening here in California and what you can expect to happen in your area as well. The requirement, and there's a new ordinance that's going to require AMI metering, that's advanced metering infrastructure on all wells. So let's talk about that. They're talking about a deadline here in the state of California that all wells are to be metered by October 1st of 2020. And what they tell us about that is that they are going to and will be able to digitally, this is all wireless, this is adding to the frequencies in the environment as well, but they say that all of the metering will be downloaded, data-driven, and that they say it will be a pilot program. So I want to just underscore something. Nothing is a pilot program. They make it sound like this implementation of wireless metering of all your water is a pilot program. It is not. And they're going to be monitoring every withdrawal of every drop of water in the water system that is metered. Also, we found it very interesting here in the computer cameras that are being deployed right now here in Northern California after the October 2017 fires. They say that this real-time camera all the time, even night vision, will be able to protect the water supplies. So what are we talking about? We're talking about any illegal use of water that anyone extracts from the secondary water cycle, which is only rain and snowmelt. And this is why we have Pal Pauer with us this evening, because Paul has been for 50 years talking about primary water. And his website is theprimarywaterinstitute.org. And Paul is the founder of Primary Water Institute. And Paul talks about how grateful he is for the science of primary water, and that it's now possible to literally green the deserts, reversing desertification, turning arid areas into lush food-producing regions, and that primary water is generated by and from the earth, from the very mantle of the world that we live on. So it's important to understand we do not have a water shortage. We're being sold that water is a finite resource, meaning a limited water resource, and it is not. Again, we also run the website primarywater.org. Download the various books and the topics that we will be discussing tonight so that you can pass this on to your children and make them aware that this is a global program to reduce the access of water. So, Paul, I want to thank you for joining us on the program this evening. I know that we're going to talk about Dr. Stephen Reese and the last interview that he did. And I made some notes about that and wanted to discuss some of those comments within his last interview and would love to hear what you would have to say, because I know that Dr. Stephen Reese was a mentor of you and for you. And he has an interview. It's entitled, it's on YouTube, What is Primary Water? 1985 interview with Dr. Stephen Reese. And again, it was Dr. Stephen Reese's last interview, his very last interview. And it's important because he divulges the contamination aspects of water, etc. So, Paul, I know that you have been carrying the information forward about primary water, and I would like for you to talk to the people that are listening about the aspects of water, primary water, how it's available, what they need to do to get to it. And we're going to cover a lot of topics because certainly you and I have been talking about regions now that are in crisis, and particularly in Baja, in Mexico. There's an ongoing crisis right this minute. So, Paul, I thank you for joining us. Paul, are you there?
Did we lose him?
It sounds like we need to get Paul back up on the program. So while we are doing that, let me continue with the discussion on primary water, because it is absolutely essential that everyone understand what is happening. We have many documents from the World Bank that water is now being literally compressed into privatization and ownership and disbursement. And we need to understand that water is going to become more difficult to get to as time goes by, as well drilling is prohibited, and people are unable. Paul, thank you. We lost you for a moment, so I'm glad that we were able to get you back.
On you guys with that radical line of talk.
Oh, well, let's just get into primary water and only consolidate our conversation within primary water. Prior to your falling off the call, we were talking about primary water and the interview with Dr. Stephen Reese, who was your mentor. And there's an excellent YouTube. I know that you refer to it, and I was talking about that. And the YouTube is entitled, What is Primary Water? 1985 interview with Dr. Stephen Reese. And I'd like you to discuss some of the most important facets of what your mentor, Dr. Reese, discussed in that YouTube. And I've made some notes too. So if you'd like to talk about the most important aspects of what he had to say about primary water.
Well, the most important thing really was, as far as I was concerned, first of all, that it was available other than rain from the sky. Water is sourced elsewhere. For example, down below from magma, where all the water has originated with. Actually, that elusive hydrogen atom and the oxygen atom combined. But nonetheless, the most important thing is pointing out that is available. It's under our feet, almost everywhere, because this planet is fractured when it cooled down. But apart from that, the most important thing is the idiocy of reusing sewer water and even proposing it for drinking. Water can go through all kinds of processes that are not necessarily beneficial to human beings, and not even plants or animals. But to reuse sewer water would seem a little bit distasteful to me than it did when I heard. Well, I talked to him about that a number of times, and he did suggest that people lost their minds totally. Having gotten so stupid that they want to go ahead and now drink sewer water in essence. And I don't care.
Well, that's exactly. Yes, and Paul, that's exactly what is being proposed, and that is exactly what is occurring now with the reused water that we see now, watering lots of the areas where cattle graze and where hay is grown to feed other animals. And I wanted to just say that the term primary water was coined by Dr. Stephen Rees, who was a geophysicist who independently discovered its primary water's existence and pioneered the development beginning in the 1930s until his death in 1985. And I feel a real connection with Dr. Rees, with your ability to have had the opportunity to talk with him, because he said that his discovery was put to the field test by locating and drilling many wells, and that primary water is a little-known renewable resource that originates deep within the earth. Oxygen combines with hydrogen to make new water, and this water is constantly being pushed up towards the surface under great pressure, and water finds its way towards the surface through fissures or faults, depending on the geology. And primary water can be accessed close to the surface or even flow out as a spring. Primary water has never been part of the secondary water supply, which is rain and snowmelt, until it finally arrives at the surface and evaporates, and then becomes rain and snowmelt. And what is important to understand is the scientific fraud behind trying to sell the idea that rain and snowmelt is our source of water, because primary water is renewable and plentiful regardless of the weather. This is extremely important, regardless of the weather. And for those of you that understand the weather weaponization, it's important to understand that regardless of that, primary water is renewable and plentiful. So, Paul, in discussing primary water, the depths are certainly something that people talk about. They say, well, we don't have the money to go to the depths that are possibly required to access water. And I think you and I did a really great job at explaining the chart that you made, and it's up on YouTube, called Primary Water Explained. So I think everyone needs to refer to that, Primary Water Explained. So what would you say to people about the conversation around the depths or the surface ability of getting to primary water?
Well, if you understand the concept that it is coming through faulted structures from down below, and independently from anything that comes from the sky, then you could consider the fractures being even on top of the mountain, or these faulted structures. So as it finds its way up, depending on how much impediment it has on its way up to close to the surface, because new water is made all the time. This planet has made new water from the time it cooled down enough to fracture. And here we go with the continental drift too. If you look at the continents, they drifted apart because new water coming up from the fractures, from the main fractures, the main faults, needed space. And water is not compressible. Once those two gases become actually solid or liquid, water is the only substance known not to be that you cannot compress. There's nothing else except liquid that you cannot compress.
So now, Paul,
Yes.
What is it that you say? Because I would like some clarification. So you've just said that water, you cannot compress it. Therefore, it must surface as it is created by hydrogen and oxygen, correct?
Yes, it has to have room. It has to have space. So the minute these two gases become solid, they require space. So at that point in time, they have to surface. They have nowhere else to go but up through these fractures. And thus we have the atmosphere. The very first of it was the atmosphere, which were the two gases. And they were the mainstay of it. And of course, on the way up, all sorts of other things were dissolved with it, because water is also the ultimate of all solvents. You cannot conceive the word solvent without using the concept of liquid or water. So you have to have a liquid substance to even consider something that could become solvent. And water is the ultimate solvent. It is not. This is not brain surgery for sure. This is easy.
Well, I want to take the time too, because I know that you highly regard the book that was written in 1960 by Michael Salzman. And for those of you that are listening, go to the website primarywater.org or primarywaterinstitute.org. You can download this book for free, and it is entitled New Water for a Thirsty World. I'm just going to go over some of the points in the book, Paul, because I know that you reference it often. And I want to just talk about what people can expect when they take a look at this book, New Water for a Thirsty World. The book is of great value to everyone that's interested in the water problem, because
please,
especially...
Before you go into the book, please read the dedication. That to me, that really grabbed my attention many years ago, because I knew the principles. I not only knew Dr. Salzman, but Rees, and also the author of the dedication.
Yes, and also the foreword is by Aldous Huxley. So for those of you that understand A Brave New World, you'd be particularly interested, again, in downloading and reading New Water for a Thirsty World. Again, I highly recommend that you do download it, make it part of your library, and teach your children that we are not running out of pure, clean, unadulterated water. And this is what we need to access. The emphasis of the show this evening is going to be about understanding where water comes from, and the fact that we must all now start to encourage those that are able to access it. And we're going to get into some more of that conversation after I discuss a little bit of this book, New Water for a Thirsty World. So why the book is important is it does solve the water problem, and it's especially for scientists and technicians and governmental officials, legislators, students, and taxpayers who are concerned with the world problem of food and water shortages and the development of the arid areas of the world. And if we are to assure continuance of humanity and all living things, we must recognize the value of an open mind and understand primary water. Because sadly, we have been programmed into believing that water comes from rain and snowmelt, and it doesn't. And the more science learns, the more deeply it realizes the staggering and overwhelming ignorance of science. And those who have refused to even look beyond the rain and snowmelt theory of the water cycle are sadly people that we cannot trust to manage our water supplies. And I say
that is, listen, please remind everyone that water comes from the secondary cycle. And yes, water comes from snowmelt and rain, but it does not originate with that. And all the time while that is the case, new water is being added to the totality of this planet in substance.
That's correct. In other words, we're the water planet. And again, we're growing in size because of the continuation of new water that continues to surface even under the ocean. It surfaces down below and in the ocean beds. But again, going back to the book that is New Water for a Thirsty World, they talk about the water facts and states that to satisfy the water needs requires, and here's what the concern is, requirements to control and conserve water resources are occurring now. And as I was just saying, I have gone to water agencies. Paul, I have taken the diagram that we speak about in explaining water and the process, again, Primary Water Explained, and I've held it up to the water agencies during their water board meetings, and I talk about primary water, and there are no notes being taken whatsoever. They are absolutely listening to this information because policies have been adopted to circumvent the truth about water. And this is and should be very scary to everyone listening, because this is who these agencies, your water agencies, are guiding water policies and the required metering and use of your water. And Paul, I have a YouTube up. It's entitled Water Wars, Stealing Water for Profit and Power. And there's a slide in there that we found off of the U.S. Forestry website that shows a map of Northern California and Oregon along the coastlines, and what the U.S. Forestry will be doing to confiscate water resources from people's private properties. And it is very alarming, Paul. It has a color code of the heights in which they will go to stop unmetered usage of water. And they say they will use guns. And this is scary, Paul, because
yeah, I know, but you know, we under the Second Amendment, under some of our constitutional rights, they haven't taken away our ability to defend ourselves and our property. Once they have succeeded with that, then we are done for.
Well, I can say that because of certainly, I'm going to recommend right now everybody listen to a YouTube. It's called The Swamp, and type in The Swamp and episode 1. I think you will then understand what has happened and why these regulations are coming down upon us that are preventing our access to water resources on our properties. And Paul, I know that we were discussing about the current ongoing crisis right now in Baja and
over in northwest, southwest Australia, in different places on this planet. There's a major problem. Look, we could surely use this water manipulated Hawaii water, at least 1/10 of it out here, so maybe our fires will be put out. So I'm not sure what in hell is going on. One thing for sure, we do have extra water down below. We have all the water we ever could use down below. In fact, in my opinion, there's probably more water. I'm just parroting now what others have said already, because the scientific community is starting to come around. It has taken them a long time, but it takes this kind of a stupidity and potentially weather manipulation and drought conditions, unlike these fires. They are unimaginable even up here. We have fires everywhere, and for a month and a half, the air was not breathable here. They have to take a look. For the listeners, I want everyone to understand that both Paul and I are in the Northern California, Southern Oregon region, where there are dozens of fires that have been burning for months. The Mendocino Complex fire that is in Northern California is not expected to be put out until sometime in September. And at this moment, it is the largest fire by acreage burn of any fire in California. And the fire that occurred here in Santa Rosa and in Sonoma County and Napa
and other counties in October of 2017 still stands as the most costly loss of infrastructure in the history of the United States. So what Paul is talking
alone, Reading lost 2,000 structures, homes. 2,000.
Yes.
That's a lot of people.
We're looking right now at a loss of well over 12,000 homes in this fire season alone. And what is happening, of course, is the fact that there are many reasons for that. Again, the plan to burn up Northern California is one YouTube I would recommend everybody watch. But getting back to water, because obviously water is important, and what I can say to everybody listening is it's very important to get to water while we can. We have to drill for water. And Paul, I want to talk about what drilling for water looks like so that people that are listening to this conversation can anticipate, and we'll link this up to visuals when we put this together for people to actually see what we're discussing. So I want to talk about what accessing water looks like, because I think people are afraid of the depths of where they have to go to access the water. They're afraid of the cost for the water. But I can only say this to everyone that is listening. What is the value of your land without water? What is the value of your land without water? And that's what we face. And Paul, I read in an EPA document that when you've used up your allotment of water and you don't have water because you've used up your allotment for that month, your property will then be considered unsafe and unhealthy. And the water regulators and authorities, will relocate us to areas of potable drinking water, because suddenly our properties that we live on are unsafe. Now, I think that is diabolical, in my opinion. And I do think what you were talking about, we're in trouble. We are in significant trouble with the defense that's going to be required to fend off the theft of water that, again, is a renewable. And that's the whole point of the program. It's renewable. The earth is generating it.
I may interject just enough, because you and I never get to discuss this one either, but water is a mineral. Any which way you look at it, it is considered a mineral by any definition. Now, when the government comes and, in essence, forbids you to extract that mineral from the ground that you stand on, they are basically doing eminent domain, for which they have to pay. Now, if the citizenry don't pull together, that goes for some of these little water districts that are about to be passed real soon, then we will have lost. We will have yet lost another part of the system, which is supposed to be democratic. It is not very democratic anymore.
Well, it isn't. And Paul, I know that I cover many YouTubes about the reality of our government, and I would really like to just stick to the conversation of water.
On the water is specifically for them to do eminent domain and reverse eminent domain on this mineral, which is water. Water is a mineral by any definition. Then, if we let them get away with that, then we will have let them get away with almost anything. They can take anything from us anytime, any personal possessions that goes with the property.
Well, let us stay to the water conversation, because honestly, at this point, we're at a place in reality of government that is, by most standards, unrecognized by the majority of people. And I do cover that in depth, and I have many YouTubes up about who really is in control, and we're certainly not. But I also want to refer everyone to a recent YouTube that just went up, Paul, that you and I did recently, and it is entitled Primary Water is Why We Are Not Running Out of Water. And it is a recent YouTube. It was just posted very recently of a very good conversation that you and I had about primary water. And I think the bottom line take home of this conversation that you and I are having right now, Paul, is that water is a renewable, and it's made down below the mantle of the earth by hydrogen and oxygen coming together. We are in the process.
Best way to illustrate that most people can understand. We have cars now that run on hydrogen. Now, if you take a very close look at what happens to the exhaust pipe, you will note that the byproduct of hydrogen using oxygen to combust, water drips out. Now, if that is not a demonstration, I don't know what is. But you see, we cannot still unable to make that because it requires heat and pressure and the elements that are down below and are part of our planet. It is a remarkable place we live.
That's true, but I want to talk about the regulations that are coming down, and the regulations that are defining water as rain and snowmelt, and they're saying that we have a very limited resource with rain and snowmelt because of the creation of the droughts that are certainly manufactured droughts. But what we're seeing, Paul, is what the United Nations is saying, and their regulatory frameworks for water resources by the World Bank. And there was a recent United Nations conference on the environment and the development. And here's what they said as a result of this conference. They said that the holistic management of fresh water is a finite, vulnerable resource. Now, I want to stop right there. The United Nations is saying fresh water is a finite resource. So I'd like you to talk about this because that is not true.
First of all, it's absolutely not true because already we have desalinization plants, however dangerous they may be, because they have to put that concentrated saline solution back to someplace. Just as we had the period of the age of the atom, where everything is going to be for nothing. But we can, right there, they are absolutely not telling the truth because we can desalinize. We can take, in essence, through reverse osmosis, etc., we can drink water from questionable sources. So that's not true already. That is the most absurd thing for them to say that it is a finite. We are a water planet. If you take a look at this planet of ours, it is made of water. Nearly, two-thirds of it, something like that, is water. Just we are very much a reflection of this planet's makeup in water. That's what our system is roughly made of. Very saline solution. It's not an accident. But for them to make these postulations is absurd.
Well, it's actually very frightening because I know when people understand that water is made down below the mantle and it is a renewable, to have the United Nations funded by the World Bank creating the illusion that we're running out of water and privatizing it based on fear and limited water resources and only containing our drinking water to municipal water supplies that are literally captured by rain and snowmelt, that stream off of our poisoned hills, off of the toxic growing methods of farming practices that, and caught into reservoirs poisoned with fluoride and chlorine when they've already been poisoned by fertilizers and more, and certainly coming through.
Well, here I got a quick question for Paul too.
Simple human occupancy. Good. Yeah.
Okay. Real quick question, and this has got to really probably stick in the craw for a whole bunch of these environmentalists and these people who want to say that water is limited. How do they explain the fact that if you believe in the evolution and that whole cycle and dinosaurs came before us, and water is a limited resource? How do they explain the fact that dinosaurs were drinking water and And then, of course, you had, of course, all the different eras that came in between, and everybody was still using water. How do they explain that there's still any left?
Good question. It is really remarkable how people can just kind of go along with it, this. I don't even want to call it logic, because it is not logic. It's some kind of, the point of it is they don't want to go back to the beginning, and the beginning says we came from the sun, and they don't want to talk about
Paul, I think that again is some. Yeah, what we need to focus on is primary water, because there are lots of belief systems and lots of.
This primary, and it comes from magma. You see,
we're heading into a break right now.
Right.
So everyone, stay tuned. We'll pick this up on the other side of this break.
Okay, everybody, hang tight. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Granada Forum radio program, ladies and gentlemen. And our special host tonight is Deborah Tavares and my co-host Nick Pearson. Deborah.
Thank you. We're talking about primary water this evening and the fact that water is a renewable. We're not running out of water, as the World Bank and the United Nations, and in fact the policies within the United States and literally globally are suggesting and claiming that we are. Again, all of our cities, all of our counties, all of our water agencies, not only throughout every department in the United States, has signed on to the climate action plans, which calls for reduced water usage, because the claims that water is from rain and snowmelt and we're running out of water simply is not true. And this is most important. This is out of the World Bank Regulatory Framework for Water Resources Management. It's a document, and they say that public disclosure was authorized. I'm just going to read a couple of things in here. This should certainly create a concern among everyone that is listening, because the World Bank and the United Nations is saying, with the challenges to the quality of water resources multiplying by the day and compounded by environmental degradation and industrialization, the need for an elaborate protective framework is evident. They go on to say that emerging trends in water legislation are increasing. The underlying purposes for legislation now include new elements, such as the sustainable utilization of water resources to protect future generations. I'm going to read that again, because this is how they're scaring us with the idea that we're running out of water. They're saying the underlying purposes for legislation now include new elements, such as the sustainable utilization of water resources to protect future generations. They say such sustainable utilization is also needed to enable states and countries to meet their international obligations with regard to shared water resources. In other words, transboundary obligations to meet our shared water resource limitations. Water resource management is necessary. Water legislation and policies are necessary. And the World Bank, the United Nations, and your water agency in your city aim to ensure the coordinated development and management of our water supplies globally and locally. So, Paul, we're in massive danger. And what I would really like now...
Kidding. You're not kidding. But we have always been, because there have been now a truly horrendous attempt by a single organization, which is the UN, to take over everything. That will be wrong.
Well, that's true. Now, what I would like to do in the remaining time that we have left in the program this evening is I would like to walk through what it is like for those that are listening that, say, for example, are living in a rural country environment where they are already on a well, and neighbors around them perhaps are already on a well, can and must do now to achieve maximum water yields by drilling additional wells or certainly creating increased development in the existing wells while they can. Because, Paul, the United Nations and local water agencies, are taking control of the water supply. They want to meter all wells. And
yes,
so people... I'm sorry?
I agree, totally agree. But it starts on a state level and below that a county level. You know, it starts from the top on down, and everybody agrees to enforce certain laws or agree to certain laws and stuff like that, and it's happening.
And it is. So with that having been said, what I would like to do is give people the understanding, create the discussion on how they start with the idea of getting to primary water, because sadly the traditional well drillers don't know. Most of them are unaware of primary water. So when they drill boreholes, they may hit a aquifer that has water in it, but they're not down to the kinds of water that you are able to access. So let's start from the top. Let's say I am contacting your organization. Let's just say that I'm in an area where people have wells, and
let me just say that a cooperation between people and neighbors, particularly in a given area, I don't care whether it's water rich, as it were, or not, is most important, because you've got to talk to your neighbor, and you've got to have some consensus about everything, basically. Water is a primary concern. Though to better illustrate the concept to people who are elsewhere in the States, it was my favorite author, Mark Twain, that was asked many years ago about how it was, because he was an Easterner, how it was living out west. He says, out west, it's an interesting phenomenon, because water, whiskey is for sipping, but water is for fighting over. We've got to stop that. We've got to immediately stop that. We cannot afford to fight over amongst ourselves over water. We have to.
Okay, well, Paul, the problem is that our regulations coming from local levels now are prohibiting our access. Hang on just a second.
You will not be able to have a pushback unless you agree with your neighbors that you have a problem. And there is a problem, and that is the problem. And I thank you for bringing that to everybody's attention.
Well, the fact is, though, not all neighbors are going to understand or even believe the primary water concept. So what I would suggest, everyone that's listening, start understanding about primary water, contact the primarywaterinstitute.org, and take your first steps towards investigating where your best drill sites are on your property, so that the Primary Water Institute can assist you with the geography of locating the best possible places to drill. What I would recommend before the bans are put in place everywhere is that everyone listening that is able to pull a well drilling permit do so now. Pull your well drilling permit now while you can, because such as in Ventura County, which is in Central California, there was a moratorium against well drilling. This occurred about 4 years ago. And so in the process of contacting Paul and others at the Primary Water Institute, it's important that you immediately start getting a well drilling permit started with a well drilling outfit. Now, that does not mean that well drilling outfit has the understanding of how to drill and access primary water. That's where Paul and the Institute come in. But get your permit now, again, while you still can. Then contact the Primary Water Institute and follow their lead on where you should drill, and they will certainly be able to instruct the drill rig operator how to access primary water. Now, as you're listening to this conversation right now, we're going to be interlacing in this YouTube what it looks like to access primary water, and you're going to see visuals probably now. And understand that to drill doesn't necessarily cost a tremendous amount of money. Yes, it's not for free. Everyone knows that. I know recently that some areas have been accessing boreholes at the cost of about $30 to $35 a foot for drilling. And Paul, I would like, again, to emphasize the fact that people need to start drilling now while they can, because the access to water...
Minimum get permits, because these agencies will have a hell of a time reneging on. They will throw stumbling blocks. They will hold you up, and that's their job. You know, they get an instruction from somebody, just like any other governmental agency, and they will hold you up. You best get your permit
and the problem, too, is do this quickly. I would highly recommend that everyone that is listening go ahead and start talking about getting to primary water. Order all of your well equipment now, your pumps, your lines, your holding tanks. Get all of that material now, while you're also still able to acquire anything associated with your own access of water. The window is closing. And
the window is closing only because we had these fires now, so they have an extra ordinary muscle that they can put in and say, well, see what you guys done? And nobody did this except these agencies that are purveyors of the water that we do have. And these surface waters, God forbid if we should have an accident of any kind, where we would have some fallout from the atmosphere, what in heaven's name would you be drinking? They have a hell of a time filtering out radiation. You know,
I know that you wanted to talk about that, because getting to primary water seals off that. So why don't you explain that to people, and we'll continue with how people get to water. So go ahead and explain the radiation aspect.
It's okay because, you know, when you drill in for water, obviously if you drill in the Central Valley of California, you can have overburdens that may be as much as 700-800 feet or more, depending on where you are in the bathtub, as it were. In some places, that very bathtub, the bottom is right on top. And the water, you can access water within a few feet, but it all depends on the geology of the place and the structure. But just the same, you should get unless you're on a city parcel, a quarter-acre parcel where there is no way you could access it by any equipment, then you have a problem. But if you are in the countryside where you have at least 3 acres plus, where you are sufficiently removed from your septic disposal systems, etc., you should have your own water. You should have your own water sources, or at least try to get it, and find out just what you have. It is yours. It's under your feet, and by all means, go get a permit to do so.
Okay, so again, we can't underscore enough for those of you that are listening that imagine what your property would be like without water, and with a meter on your well and reduced water ability. Think about getting to primary water. Now, I can say to all of you that are also listening, the smart meters, when they were deployed a few years ago, there were many people that would not consent to a smart meter. And many people today do not have smart meters. So I can say, do not consent to a meter on your well. Do not consent. And I can say, again, as Paul just said, pull your permit. Contact the Primary Water Institute. Find out where you should be drilling. And understand that there's going to need to be conversation with your well drilling outfit in your location with the Primary Water Institute, so that you know that the communication will develop the access to primary water. Now, drilling a borehole is one thing, But there's also some additional facts that everyone needs to understand and hear about. And Paul, I want to thank you because I had the opportunity to be with you and watch several wells being drilled. And I was really surprised. I had never heard of the idea that after the well is drilled, you frack it and you drop dry ice in it. And it certainly can be a dangerous process, and people that do it must be careful.
It is one method to really enhance the production of a well that is not producing what was desired in the first place.
And to explain why people want to drop dry ice in it in large pieces.
If you have sufficient quantity of water, if you think that you do, you may not need to do that. But if the structure is such that your geologist will tell you that it is very tight, it is producing water, but not enough, then it is possible to open up those fractures with CO2 dry ice. But I should not like to go into any further because it is a dangerous procedure, and I'd rather leave that out altogether, because it could hurt people, and I don't care to have the liability.
Well, let me ask you this then: what if they're going down there and they're dropping dry ice down there and they're fracking for water? What else are they releasing into the water when they're doing it?
Well, good question. Invariably, it is water, depending on what your geologist tells you, because he can look at the material that is coming out of the borehole while it is being drilled.
So they know, Nick, before they frack it, what is occurring. The idea for dropping the dry ice and fracking is to literally...
you have to have a couple of indications in saying that, hey, wait a minute, this is what I have here. I have a tight structure here. It is really tight. It's just about horizontally as tight as a knife blade or less. But it is producing water because it shows up in the form of certain minerals.
Now,
but
now let me understand.
There's nothing else
in
the
hang
water
on,
when
hang
they do
on,
this.
hang on. Let me understand something. When you're saying tight structures and fracking, let me get back to what I witnessed. Okay, tight structures, meaning that when the dry ice is dropped down the well, let's just say, for example, you have a 100-foot well. And you would drop in dry ice to come...
Well, first of all, you would have to have a reason to drop in anything, because your geologist will tell you that, listen, the material that I just observed indicates a very tight structure that has the following minerals. And in order to enhance the production of this well, when finished, it would be a good idea to freeze it or dry ice it. The concept is same as water fracking with minerals for oil, but it is with the exception of now we are after water only, and we are not after hydrocarbons. And water freezes.
Okay.
We know that water freezes. Dry ice is actually quite a bit below zero or 32 degrees. So if you drop a sufficient amount of dry ice into a column that does contain the water that was derived from those seeps, as it were, from those fine fractures, you could be reasonably sure that you may enhance the output of that structure by freezing it, thus expanding it. Because what
I observed, and let me explain at this moment for people that visually can't imagine what is being said. And what I observed was when the dry ice was dropped in, the well created a rumbling sound like a washing machine. And it was very important to stand far away because literally the dry ice can eject like a cannon. And so it's a very dangerous process, as Paul said, and it's not for everyone to do. But what can happen is it enlarges the fractures that are coming into the borehole, cleans the dirt out, and allows more water to be developed. This is the part of developing a well that most
Correct.
well drillers are absolutely clueless. They don't understand how to develop a borehole. You don't just drill a borehole and walk away, drop a pump in it, and say, I've got a well. You have to develop this. Wouldn't you say that that's correct from my understanding, Paul?
Yes, indeed, and also you do not draw full volume of water, even if the well would indicate 100 gallons a minute. You obviously are not going to try to draw 100 gallons, because you are drilling into not a structure that is an unsorted alluvium. It doesn't matter what you drill into, as a matter of fact, but still in all, if you pull too much water out of any structure, that structure will collapse, and that does the sinkholes throughout the places where you see that they're talking about sinkholes. So sinkholes.
So subsidence and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So let me get back to this.
So wait. I just want to go back to one. I just want to go back to one thing real quick, because they are doing the fracking, and you touched on how they do fracking for oil and everything, and basically what it does, it releases everything that's in that particular area where they actually blow the minerals and everything. How do they know what they're getting into the water when they do something like that?
What do you mean? How do you know?
Well, do they do the tests and everything like that? But I mean, you're basically introducing every mineral in that area into the water source. So how do they know what they're getting in the water when they do that? I mean, what do they make sure that they're not getting something toxic?
Okay, so Nick, this is what people would do in working and developing a well, and water is tested as it's being drawn from the well, so that the mineral consistency of the water is tested. And what we're trying to get across to people by trying to verbalize this concept of developing a well is critical. So I want to jump from the idea of fracking, because it's not fracking.
Wait, while he was asking the question at the right time, I should like to add that invariably, you should check to see what you're getting. Yes, and Steve did it in a very simple way. He just lit a piece of paper. He suspected some methane, because you can't smell that stuff. Because along with primary water, you will have primary gases too, and methane is one of them. So sometimes when the water surfaces, it is driven by yet another gas, which sometimes is methane. But methane itself is no problem, as long as you know you got it.
Okay, so the next aspect of developing a well would be the idea of foaming it. And if you would explain to people, because again, this is not your standard process that well drillers are capable of knowing, again, because they don't even understand primary water as renewable.
They use it. Sometimes when they drill very fast, and sometimes water comes in, especially when we are talking about structures that contain primary water, because now you have water that is rushing in from fractures, with which they produce a great deal of material that is rubbish, and then all of a sudden they find out that they just lost so many feet of material because stuff was washing in, even from a solid hole. Well, how do you remove that quickly? Well, there's a drilling foam that you can add, which is basically soap. It's nitrogen in base, and it foams up. Very little is used, and it foams up, and it, just like snow, it grabs. It does not let particles to settle, so then it can be blown out with air through the hole.
So then what people will see, because there are going to be visuals in our conversation right now, because we do have visuals of a foaming process. So what people will see is a muddy, thick water coming out as the well is being scrubbed or cleaned. And
Indeed.
Paul, this can be, people can foam their wells a number of times. They can frack their wells a number of times to develop a well. Now, a well can be babysat for a week, even 2 weeks, where this process can continue to develop the maximum ability for that well to produce as much water as it possibly can. And that is the shortcoming of the well drilling outfits today. They don't understand how to develop a well. So with that having been said, people, again, need to contact Primary Water Institute. Certainly they can look at a lot of the YouTubes that we're going to insert here in this radio program this evening that's going to demonstrate what we are talking about. But again, the underline is three things. Primary water. We have plenty of water. We are not running out of water. It is not a finite resource as we are being tricked into being sci-fied. We're being psyopsed with the idea of limited water. Secondly, we've got to get to water, primary water, while we can, because they're planning and are eliminating our access to water. Pull your well drilling permits now and contact the Primary Water Institute to get a location for best drill sites and drill for water now. Understand it's simply not as before when people, again, drilled and got a borehole and then they dropped a well pump in it and they thought, wow, we have a well. No, you have to develop the well, and that's what we're trying to explain in detail on how you develop a well. So, Paul, talk to me and to those that are listening about the decision whether you case and gravel pack a well or not. What is the decision? Because I know typically the well drilling outfits case the well down to the full depth of the borehole and they gravel pack it. What are the pros and cons of doing that?
First of all, the word case the well, is actually a well screen, which is a screen, part of a plastic pipe, PVC, thick-walled, that is placed into the well after it's finished being drilled, that has slots either bored into it or cut into it in the factory. That is what they call a well screen. And in the event that you are drilling into an alluvium, which I don't, I try to stay away from that. The alluvium.
Explain alluvium. Explain alluvium.
Alluvium is a structure where you have unsorted sands and gravels in a bathtub-like structure that permits water flow from the sky straight down. In other words, it has a chance to produce water that is contaminated already from the surface. I always bypass those, drill through those, seal those out, and drill into solid, consolidated, hard rock, be it basalt or granite. It doesn't matter.
So now let me clarify something, and then we're going to continue with the well casing. But when you're talking about drilling past the alluvial condition, what I'm understanding, and I just want to make sure I understand this correctly, what our water agencies are doing is we're being tricked into believing that these aquifers, these basins, they are being overpumped, and they are, of course, presenting us with toxic water. But they could drill beyond that, go deeper into those bathtubs, so to speak, that are prohibiting the access of primary water from recharging those basins. But when you drill into...
Make a difference. Because they do leak in large enough, because you see the structures down below that are fractured all the way down, they do already produce a volume of water that sustains what you call a norm as far as water levels go in these bathtubs. We are now experiencing a situation or a condition where in California in general, none of these bathtubs are getting recharged from the surface. So only those plants that can reach into those fractures seem to survive. And you can easily demonstrate that by looking in certain places where there is drought. And I have witnessed that in places of growth, native growth, where in almost a straight line, maybe somewhat varying degrees to a straight line, trees will grow right next to them. There are dead trees. Now, those dead trees were established at one time or another when there was a different equilibrium as to the weather pattern. Today, our weather pattern is trying to reestablish itself.
Well, actually, Paul, that's another conversation because we have geoengineering, the deliberate alteration of the weather worldwide. But if we disregard that fact, which we really can't, because this is
it's part of an explanation for what's happening in here, because there's so much disinformation, and I am not, I got to blush every once in a while listening to our president, because he's
let's get back to the conversation, Paul, about the casing of the well
and the news stations. That is scary. It is scary, and people actually buy it. I'm not sure if they get dumbed down to a point where nobody knows anything or what.
Paul, let's talk about, because prior to this, we were talking about the basins that are like bathtubs that literally capture the secondary water supply, which is rain and snowmelt, and that's the alluvial that you don't like to drill in because it's sandy and gravelly, and you drill deeper than that and seal it off. But then we were talking about the casing.
The casing is not needed if the structure is so tight, because what have you got to lose? You are going to go ahead and have an increased yield production from a well that you can actually develop slowly, even if it.
So does the casing and the gravel packing actually slow down?
Retards the future development of that borehole.
So is it easier then to develop that borehole without the casing if you're in rock, as opposed to putting?
Yes, indeed, and you never want to go ahead and do that if the structure is such that it is solid.
So basically what we see with typical well drillers is they drill, case, and gravel pack. Whatever, it doesn't matter what kind of structure they're in.
That is absolutely by the book, and nothing changes that unless somebody tells them differently. And that is not the way to go.
Yes.
Because you can seal off the surface and meet all the requirements, which is a good idea. The top 25 to 30 feet, depending on how soon you enter bedrock, quote unquote, it is a good idea to seal off all the surface potential for all surface pollutants. You must do that so that you don't contaminate yourself. So the surface pollutants may be sealed off with a collar that fits off over the first 20 or 30 feet of a drill stem or pipe. And after that, you can free float. If the structure is such, you can, but you have to have someone to say, hey, this will work. What will happen if you gravel pack all that? Within 5 to 10, 20 years, the gravel pack will absolutely plug, because it'll behave like a screen and a filter around your pump. At which point you will lose production, and you think that structure doesn't have any water. Well, that structure could have had all kinds of water, probably had all kinds of water, but there was no way to get that stuff out of there, in short of what you have done and try to filter it.
So what we're talking about here is the standard operating procedure of well drillers, and the training that they have is not.
They can't tell you that. Hey, listen, if you don't put this well screen in or casing, you might lose your pump. Well, it depends on the structure. If the structure is unconsolidated sand and gravel, you've got to. Or if they encounter anything down to the point where they stop drilling anything that is so unstable as to bury your pump. Of course they will. But even then, it would be a whole lot better if you didn't gravel pack.
So now let's talk about, too, I know that some well drilling outfits will put a pump in, and talk about the typical depth of where you would drop a pump. Let's say, for example, you have a well that's 100 feet in depth. How far down would you drop that pump?
I do not recommend anyone drilling a well less than 150 feet in depth.
Okay, so then let's take a well at 150 feet in depth. How far down do you recommend people dropping that pump? To what depth? Because you said earlier you do not want to overpump the well because it could collapse. So let's talk about that.
That you can overpump it at any point, but the thing is that the pump should be placed somewhere between 10 to 15 feet, depending on, again, on the material that was encountered in drilling it.
Okay, so if the material is what you...
Yes.
So if the material is material that is good and it's solid, then how far down in 150 foot?
10 feet the lowest point, so that there is a chance where the new developed water, because now you have an open hole, as it were, that stuff has a chance to wash in and settle in the bottom. And at some point in time, you can pull that pump and clean that well simply by blowing the garbage out of there with air. I mean, that's no big deal.
So you rent a compressor and you and then you blow the air down.
I recommend that's how it's done, the cheapest possible way.
Okay.
You can't bring.
So what I'm understanding you're telling us is that if you have a well, a borehole that's 150 feet in depth, you would drop your pump no more than 140 feet, so that it's not in an area where there's possible increase of filaments and so forth that would clog the well up. Is that what you're saying? The last 10
feet should, and I say should in parentheses, accommodate without any liability on my part. That would be my recommendation. And
so now, okay,
that it should be sufficient space left down below for further settlement of fines that would be washing in from the fractures. Again, it all depends on the structure itself and a presence of somebody that has some idea of what the hell they are doing. And that remains the problem, is that by and large, no one really knows what they're doing but primarywaterinstitute.org. So, for my remaining time that I'm allowed to establish this institute, so I can train enough people. No, not only, I mean, last time around I had a bright young man from New Zealand to Kenya that had what you have to be, you almost have to bring the people to the site, and you need funds to do that, and without funds, you're what are you doing? It's going to have to come somewhere. Well, the problem, of course, is not only the funds, but now the increasing amount of regulation that is not going to allow access for drilling wells. And certainly they're trying to hide the fact of primary water because they destroyed Muammar Gaddafi's primary water system that was known as the eighth wonder of the world when the United States and NATO blew it up and sent Libya into a humanitarian crisis, which they knew it would, because Muammar Gaddafi delivered primary water to 75% of the villages in the region that were able to have the primary water directed to them. And they blew up the well drilling rigs also, saying that it looked like missile launchers. So we're in very diabolical times with access to water, where they blew up Libya and to get rid of
any evidence of primary water by blowing up the well drilling rigs. So again, the well drillers need to learn quickly how to access primary water. I would recommend, if you are a well driller, that you contact the primarywaterinstitute.org immediately and get some training on how you access the water, because you're going to get to the only solution to survive the water restrictions and the increased scarcities that they're going to put on the illusion of not being able to access pure, clean drinking water, force us into drinking sewer to tap, which has already occurred, and massive desalinization plants that are scheduled to be built everywhere. They're going to literally be asset stripping everybody with the way in which they're going to deliver massive toxic levels of water by systems that are dirty and toxic to begin with. Our oceans are toxic. And certainly the Yes, go ahead, Paul.
Even if they can clean everything up to let's say, water, well, I see a lot of water on the shelves that are distilled water. Now, why in God's name would you want to drink distilled water? You might as well drink vodka. It will leach your system of calcium, you know?
Well, there's a lot of debate around the type of water, but of course we know primary water is not distilled water, but it has minerals.
It does.
Yeah.
It has to. But the thing is that the biggest problem, once again, we have a technology that is invented to save us, which is now desalinization, reverse osmosis, etc. What in God's name are we doing with the residue? Just like with the atom. You know, we had this wonderful idea, and I think that was the greatest thing. We had from the sun. We don't know.
Yeah, Paul, I've got to add this, because you and I talked about the problem, the Baja water crisis in Mexico, and I just want everyone to know this is a worldwide assault on restricting our access to water.
It is.
And here's an example. Here's an example. In Ensenada, or Baja, California, and they're facing a severe water crisis. And there are many cities that are affected, Ensenada, Tijuana, Rosarita, and San Quintin. And the most dramatic case is the irrigation district with desalinated seawater, because the aquifers of the place has high levels of salinity. So I want to talk about the high levels of salt water in the aquifers that abut the oceans area, because we know that they're being overpumped, just as you discussed the bathtub idea. And when they're overpumped and they're abutting the ocean, the seawater will then seep in, because that is a heavier content than potable water. And so we've got salinity. And so what we've got going is the intentional land grab of overpumping aquifers that are adjacent to ocean areas, water areas, they're allowing the salt water to leach in. They know, the powers that be know exactly what they're doing, and this has been happening along the coastlines everywhere.
Well, I certainly hope that they don't, because if they do know all the things that they propose to do, we'd be in a deeper doo-doo than we are right now, because
we are in deep trouble, and they do know what is occurring. This is not a mistake. This is sadly intentional.
Because what we could use 1/10 water that is flooding out Maui, for God's sakes, just 1/10 out here to put out our fires. Now, you know, if these people are doing it on purpose, they sure as hell are come from hell. And I think we ought to go
many people would suggest that that's the case. So, having said that, though, the most important aspect of this conversation is to encourage everyone that is listening that for survival's sake, And if you're a prepper or you're in a rural area, as Paul was suggesting, communities need now to get together and assist with a rural country landowner in accessing primary water. Help with this. I will tell you this, Paul. Right here in Northern California after the fires, in a city very close to where I am, they're now facing a groundwater management scheme, and they don't understand it. Let me explain what...
They already had that in Ventura County 4 years ago, for heaven's sakes.
Well, and that's correct. But until it hits every city, they don't realize what's happening. And so we're in trouble, and it is intentional. Make no mistake about this.
I don't know what it is not good. Because, first they sold carbon credits, these states, between each other. And you know what was bullshit? Now they're
selling air.
Excuse me for the language, but Steve, I think if they're, I think you're going to play Steve on the thing in here. The old man was pretty forward and forward spoken. And
he had some colorful language for sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do use some too myself, but sometimes for emphasis, I feel it is utmost and important and should be reserved. But we ought to get our act together and take a look at our government and its policies, because if they don't stop this, we're going to have a bigger problem, bigger problem. And
we're going to be up shit creek, aren't we?
Well, we're in trouble. And what I want to add at this point is what's happening, of course, in Baja and elsewhere. So I'm just using the word Baja because you can type it in, Baja water crisis, and you can look at this documented situation that's occurring right now, right there. But they're talking about how they need to repurpose their agricultural production methods and change the irrigation of their agriculture to desalinated seawater, Paul, using desalinated seawater.
Lots of luck. At least they have some way to fake it into the Pacific Ocean. But places like the Sea of Cortez can't quite do that. That thing is a bay. And no matter what you think of the Mexicans, they are smart enough to know not to dump their crap and try to or put their into their backpacks. Well,
the problem is this: people are being hoodwinked by policies that they don't understand and don't know are policies. And people are busy working 2 jobs, raising a family. They don't believe that the corruption would run so deep that the inability to access water would be a reality of a time that they live in. But that's the time we all live in.
Look, and these guys are trading ships with carbon credits. Are you kidding? Now, water was next for sure, and it has always been on the table. Now, only thing we can do is keep our fingers crossed and our eyes on the ball. And we are Americans, and I am too, and I'm grateful to be. And what else can I tell you?
Well, I'm going to say what else, because everyone that's been listening, you've heard what you need to do to access water. Apart from any other political positions that we discuss, accessing water is essential, because your political politicians are going to deny you water because they have voted in, through the corporate structure, climate action plans and resilient plans that reduce your access to all resources in your communities. Make absolutely no mistake. In order to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions or to reduce your carbon footprint, to reduce CO2, and to reduce ultimately oxygen. This is strangulating the planet with the reduction of CO2 emissions. It's all a farce. It is an absolute farce. I can't recommend more, Paul. Well, water is a weapon now. It's being not only used as a weapon of toxic poisoning to reduce the ability for people to think, but it's also being reduced, and our food supply is now being shifted into the control of a new world order, where everything is one, where water is controlled singularly, because certainly once the meters are deployed and that will register every drop of extraction of water, everything will be limited and reduced. Cities will be relocated.
The business of water use is directly linked to life and the food you're going to have. And if that is denied to people somehow, which they're working on, it's a bit way beyond. That is more than just what you would call troublesome. And I would like to invite my fellow citizens to please keep their eye on the ball and don't let them get away with it.
Well, I can say this for also to everyone that's listening. Access the information about getting to primary water. It is not necessarily great depths that you have to go to access primary water. Certainly there are ways in which you need to do that, though. Your well drillers, in most instances, as we said, are unable to understand how to drill. And get to primarywaterinstitute.org while you can and get some assistance with accessing the water. Understand that Paul has been instrumental in accessing primary water in many areas throughout the world and in Africa as well, and has been extremely successful with getting to primary water and saving villages in Kenya, for example. And that's why I recommend all of you watch the video. Primary water is why we are not running out of water, and you will see some of the footage of the water that Paul and the Primary Water Institute accessed in Kenya, and you'll see how that saved the lives of the people in those villages. Right. But we are literally at a point in our time on this earth where we now must become more self-reliant. We've turned over too much to those that are in control, and they are now in control. We are not.
Yes, and
we are not.
Also, remember this. Remember what was said by the CEO of Hershey's Incorporated. Those guys that make the chocolate, and everybody thinks they're all really great because they break them out at Christmas and everything. He stated very, very simply, water is not a right. Okay, this is the thing that keeps you alive. You can't live without it. And he said water's not a right because he wants... Go ahead, Paul.
Nestle, I believe
it's Nestle?
that was...
Oh, Nestle. Okay.
I was about to say, I'm in Nestle.
Okay, so, that's the attitude that the globalists have.
You know what?
Towards everybody.
Most of these people don't seem to realize that when they come to this planet, or when their mother let them be themselves, there was a batch of water that came with them that was free.
Well, the problem is this, of course, is we have sadly been taken over by a corporate structure, and our illusion of having a representation for our best interest is gone. It's gone. And it has been gone for a long time. For us to be in a conversation right now where we're encouraging everybody for survival's sake to access water, you must realize by this conversation and the dire warning to drill now, pull your...
Look, our air up here is pretty questionable. We have more fires. We had fires here for a month and a half where none of the air pollution control districts would dare to admit just how bad the air is. I don't know what the deaths would be attributed to it. Probably none. But I'll tell you what.
Well, I can tell you, Paul, not the case here in the Sonoma County area. They said that there were well over 100 people that died from respiratory illnesses soon after the fires. We're literally being bathed with intentional poisoning of air pollution. This is what.
Listen, in here, our visibilities at times was less than 100 yards. I'm not kidding you. So I'm not sure what it does, but my tomatoes are not ripening in the right red color. So.
Well, we also know that the fine particulates of all of the burn toxins that are in the fire-ravaged areas are seeping in to the surface water supplies and additionally adding toxins. That's why we are saying get to primary water, contact while you can the primarywaterinstitute.org and get some instruction, again, to access primary water, to avail yourself to the only way you will survive. So we're heading up to the top of the show. We're getting towards the end of this broadcast this evening, Paul, and I would like for you to say some important points that you feel you may have needed to cover. And I know that in the past you've wanted to really underscore your concern of the contamination of nuclear fallout and how primary water can be a saving aspect where you won't get the nuclear fallout when you've got your wells. So I'd like you to discuss that for a moment before the show ends.
Well, I just wanted to well, we talked about the concept of how we can seal these wells into bedrock so that any surface contaminants that would come as a result of negligence, surface occupancy, or even a mishap from the surface of nuclear nature. In other words, a catastrophe such as was in Japan, because we can seal all that stuff out and still have access to water that is drinkable. And this century's challenge will be, I feel and predict that it will be just that. It will have to provide enough water and water sources for these mishaps that are coming from the atmosphere and from negligence.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Everyone, this is Deborah Taveras. Please go to primarywaterinstitute.org and also primarywater.org and get to primary water. Pull your well permit. Your life is on the line now with understanding how water really works. Spread it far and wide.
All right, this is Granada Forum, and we'll see everybody next week. Thank Deborah Tavares and Pal Pauer for coming on. And
thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Paul.
It has been a